Welcome everybody. Welcome to another Electric Culture of Safety, Lineman Safety National Webinar. And you're in for a great treat here today. We have, the topic is going to be pursuit of a zero SIF workplace. And Mr. Michael Bahr came here, he traveled here all the way from Colorado to be here today, here in our Liveline Training Center in South Carolina for you. And it's January, it's a little cold this morning, but it feels good in the sun, and it's a great day. And appreciate you all being here and being a part of what we're doing, bringing together and unifying into a line team, nationwide line team. Mr. Mike Bahr, met him on LinkedIn, kinda, about a year ago, and he was very intriguing. His passion, talking about complacency and how we can prevent SIFs, and very intrigued. And I watched him, and I was hooked by what he had to say and how he shared it, the way he gives himself back. And he is a perfect example of what ECAUS is all about. He himself actually paid for the trip here from Colorado to South Carolina, and greatly appreciate how him and all these other folks are just giving back freely to you all. So you have this. I didn't realize this. I was giving Mike a tour of our facility here, and he happened to see the OSHA Stall Cops OSHA 1910.269 on here, and he says, "Hey Brent, did you know that I helped write that with James Stallcop?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So I didn't know this, I just learned today, but he's also an author. And sure enough, his name, I've had this on my desk forever going through it, and his name is right there. Who would have thunk it? So he's actually an author. He doesn't like to say that, but he is. So great guy. Had a wonderful dinner with him last night, him and his wife, and just a lot of fun and a real person. So you guys are in for a treat, and great that you all are here, and hope you enjoy. Michael? Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Hey, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about this opportunity. I've been thinking about this and what I'm going to talk about for since Brent asked me if I do this, and one of my passions is talking about contact. You know, the things that are happening in our industry, and how many people are making contact, and how many lives we're losing, how many injuries we're having, and some of my thoughts on what we can do to maybe tweak our programs just a little bit and eliminate some of this stuff that's happening. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and I've got a lot of material, and you know, I'm hoping to keep this to about an hour, but we'll see how things go. So. As Brent said, I've been in the industry a long time. This is my 50th year. I just retired from full-time employment just a few weeks ago, actually about a month ago. And as you can see, I've got my retirement beard going. So I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to keep it. My wife's not liking it that much. So, but I started out in 1974 as an electrician. And I worked as an electrician for a number of years, and I had some good friends that were linemen, and they kept teasing me about being a narrow back, you know, all that stuff that comes with that. And I really, you know, I'd watch these guys, and I really liked what they did, and I thought, you know, I want to do that. So I switched, applied for a second apprenticeship, and did line work for a number of years, and eventually found my way in safety and training, and that's kind of an unusual story as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But that's my history. And again, we live in Montrose, Colorado. Beautiful place. We love it out there. Great little town. Lots of mountains around us. We've got the San Juans. You know, we got Silverton and Durango and Telluride and Grand Junction. It's just a beautiful area. And we spend a lot of time outdoors, mainly on motorcycles of some type. So beautiful area. and we just love it out there. Been married to my wife for almost 46 years now. So we've been together a long time, and we've been able to raise a great family. I've got 4 absolutely just amazing kids. I've got 4 amazing granddaughters and now 1 great granddaughter. So it's been a great life, and I owe a lot of it to our industry. I've been in this industry my whole life. I love the people, and you know, but stuff happens in our industry, and a lot of it is things that don't have to happen. How I got started in safety? Well, you know, back in my day, it seemed like the people that ended up in safety were the ones that had the accidents, right? So we would take people that have gotten themselves hurt, and we'd move them into safety. And that's kind of what happened to me. I had an incident in 1985, and I got myself burned. My hands, my face, my ears, not terribly, but, and that's when I first realized that, you know, what we did, you know, there were risks, and you could seriously get hurt. About a year later, a guy that worked in another shop separate from where I worked was involved in an incident in a substation. You know, from the slides, you can see it was a fairly large arc flash. His name was Dennis. I didn't know Dennis real well, but from what I know of him, he was a great guy, but he was working inside this cubicle inside of a substation, and they caused an arc flash, and Dennis received about an 80% third-degree burn. They life-flighted him down to Salt Lake, and he survived, but he just has had a horrible time, you know, a horrible life. And but this is the incident that changed me. This is the one that I said, you know what, we got to do things different. And so I started to push back pretty hard with management and telling them, you know, we've got to do things differently. Now, this is before we had really any regulations for our industry. This was before 1910-269 and Subpart V. So we didn't have a whole lot of regulation for our industry. But the harder I pushed, the more that the company would ask me to help. You know, well, what are we going to do? What do we do about this? And you know, this is before the internet too. So you didn't have the means to really do what we can do now when trying to find information. So anyway, we developed some programs, and then we had to train on them, and gosh, the next thing I knew, this is what I was doing full time. And it's just been a great career. It literally has taken me around the world. I've traveled to, you know, Asia and the Middle East, and it's just been a great career, and I've absolutely loved it. And the thing I found out about going overseas is they have the same problems we do, right? They have to do what they do with less than what we have. They don't have what we have. They don't have the training. They don't have the PPE. They don't have the things that we have, but they have the same issues. You know, they're making contact over there just as much as we are, maybe more. So, so that's what I want to talk about a bit today. Is some of the things that are going on in the industry, and some of the numbers and some of the types of incidents that are happening. One thing that I think everybody needs to really focus on, of course, is some of the, you know, the age group that most of this is happening with in our industry. It's and guys, this is happening almost weekly. You can see this stuff posted on Facebook and LinkedIn, where almost weekly, and there's times where you'll see 2 fatalities a week. You know, there'll be one on a Tuesday, and then all of a sudden Thursday there's another one posted, and the harm that this does to a young family, a young mother now with 1 or 2 children that all of a sudden has to pick up the pieces, and they have to try and make something of their lives, because all their dreams, everything that they've been doing and everything that they've planned, it's gone, it's changed, it's over, and it's devastating. When the breadwinner of the family is all of a sudden taken out, yeah, it's tough, man. It really is. And I think back early on, one of the first electrical utility contractors I was working for, kind of early on in my career, I got a call one morning, and the president of the company called me. His name was Mark. He says, "Mike, we've had an incident up in Conifer, up Colorado. The guys were up there doing a single-phase to three-phase conversion, and one of the guys, his name was Chris, had made contact with the line. And they said, you need to get up there, it's not good." So I get up there, and all the guys were gathered at this was down a right-of-way that you couldn't drive down. They had to walk more than a quarter mile into the right-of-way to get to the work site. And they had carried Chris out, and they were just putting him in the ambulance when I drove up, and of course he had passed away. And I remember that as being, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I almost quit. I almost decided this isn't for me. And a couple days later, the president of the company asked me to go visit his mother. This was a single guy. He was 28 years old. And the president of the company wanted me to take his mother a check to help with funeral expenses. So I took my wife with me, and we went down to her home, and we were sitting there talking, and she moved over right in front of me and sat in a chair right in front of me, and she asked me to explain to her why her son wasn't coming home. Why was he not wearing his protective equipment? Why didn't he have his gloves on? No gloves, no cover, nothing, right? And that's tough, man. How do you explain that to someone? How do you tell them that he just didn't do it, you know? And his foreman didn't say anything. There were 4 people on the ground, and nobody said a word, with him being in that mad distance with no PPE. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing, you know? And that was a tough one, and I think about that often. And yeah, and the same thing when you know these young wives that are losing their husbands and these kids, what do you tell them? You know, how do you explain that? So anyway, age groups that suffer the most in our industry is somewhere between 25 and 34. So these are young guys, young families, young wives, young children, just new mortgage, you know, they just bought a boat, they got all these responsibilities, and now, right, the wife has to pick that up. So line workers in our industry, of course, have the highest incident rate of any job classification in utilities and utility construction. It's the line workers that have the highest rate, of course. Now, during the 1920s, our industry had the highest incident rates. It was the most hazardous work of anybody out there. And today, guys, we're still the top 10. You know, if you take the top 10 most hazardous industries, we're about number 8 on that list now. So we've moved down that list, and hopefully we can get off of that top 10. But we seem to be stuck. We just seem to be stuck in that number 7, number 8, and we can't seem to get off of it. And it just seems to me that at this point we should have grown to a point where this is no longer the case. But again, here we are. Things just keep rolling along, and these incidents that are occurring, they're all avoidable, in my view. We have the rules, we have the policies. You know, Brent the other day did a podcast, and I listened to that podcast. And one of the things that Brent mentioned was the rule books just keep getting thicker, right? We have an incident, and it's very common for people in our industry, not just ours, but really any industry. It's common for people to think, well, the rule isn't working, right? We need more rules. We need to tighten things up. When truly the rules that we have, if they're followed, would prevent it. But yet like Brent said, the book just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. But yet here we are, more husbands, more sons, more fathers not going home. So we just need everybody in our industry to band together, and we got to make it stop. It just is time to, I believe, to obviously we got to keep educating, we got to keep enforcing the rules, and we got to make sure our policies are enforced. And I want to talk about a couple of things that I think can help that to happen. Now, attitude. Attitude is, in my view, one of the problems that I see out there. And some of the things I say and some of the things that I talk about makes some people nervous. And this might be one of those areas, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. I ran across this little meme on a subreddit the other day. Well, it's been a while back. And it implies that anybody in the utility industry that's an engineer or works in human resources or works in safety is useless, right? And some people might find that amusing, and maybe it is. But it wasn't the meme itself that I had an issue with. It was the comments, right? It was the way that people responded to this meme. And I'm telling you, if we have a situation where you have a strong feelings about safety and the safety guy that I read on that subreddit, there's issues. You got a problem. If people scatter when the safety guy drives up, and it's not a pleasant experience. And I'm not saying it has to be pleasant, but we got a problem. There's a definite problem. And I'll be the first to admit that sometimes we don't have the right people in the right job. There's some issues there. But I was just blown away at the comments of people and how they truly feel about their management and the way that safety is managed. It was a little disturbing, and yeah, we got to change that. It shouldn't be like that, and if it is, we got to fix it. Because it's just not good for anybody. So that's one of the issues out there. We line workers are some of the most intelligent, the finest people out there. I love the line industry and I love the people in it. Line workers have good values. They're family oriented, and nobody should be coming to work and going and not leaving, not going home. Yeah, we gotta do things a little different. And one of the things that I mainly want to talk about, of course, today are SIFs, but from the standpoint of contact. And I follow the industry pretty close, and I look at what's happening. I look at the types of contacts that are happening, and I'm telling you, it really is puzzling to me how a crew of line workers can show up in the morning, right? And there's not a we can't put a process in place almost in every instance that can effectively prevent contact with an energized line. You know, if it just shouldn't be happening. So mistakes do happen, right? But these are not, a lot of these aren't mistakes. These are oversights. These are not someone forgetting to do this or that. A lot of this is just plain complacency and oversight when it comes to, we're not talking about twisting ankles here. We're not talking about getting slivers, you know. We're not talking about, you know, hitting my finger with a hammer here. Those things hopefully won't happen, but they do. We're talking about the stuff that people don't go home, you know, and that's what that's the thing that's harming our industry, is these fatalities and serious injuries. So, okay, I was asked to do a podcast a while back, and the guy that was interviewing me on this podcast, he asked me, okay, Mike, you've been in the industry for 50 years now, so what's changed? What's different now than when you started? When it comes to safety and the way people approach it, and of course there has been a lot of changes, but I had to admit that really nothing's changed. Nothing's really changed. People go to work and do the same thing, make the same mistakes, take the same shortcuts that they did, you know, back in the 70s when I started. And I wanted to illustrate that a little bit by showing you some statistics that, or some data that was compiled clear back in 2004. At the time, I was working for one of the large utility contractors, and it was when the OSHA T&D partnership was signed. And they put some committees together to kind of study what was going on and start to develop some good work practices based on the types of things that were happening in the industry. So I was assigned to the committee to collect and analyze all the data that OSHA had on the types of accidents that were occurring. And gosh, we got in a conference room and we just had boxes and boxes of data, because, you know, originally when OSHA started collecting data, it was all done on paper. It wasn't in a database, and so we had to go through boxes and boxes of accident reports. And I want to just kind of review quickly some of the data we collected. Okay, this is what we came up with. Contact with energized conductors, right? There were 303 fatalities. These are all fatalities. 303 fatalities, and this was from 2000 somewhere in the you know, mid 70s up until 2004. So fall from elevation, 77. Flash burns, 52, right? Now, I look at flash burns and contact with energized conductors really kind of the same thing, because there has to be a contact to have a flash burn. You got to contact it with something. So there's, anyway, that flash burns and contact, I think, are kind of in the same bucket. Struck by objects, we had 34 fatalities. Caught in between, we had 30 fatalities. And so a total of 496 fatalities, right? Now, if you take your flash burns and that contact injuries and kind of combine those two, we're talking about 71% of all our fatalities are a result of contact with lines, okay? Huge. And of course, we all know that all industry combined, the number one cause of an electrical fatality is contact with overhead lines, right? So it doesn't just happen in our industry, it happens in all industries. You know, people putting track hose and dump trucks and painters making there's a lot of people making contact with overhead lines, 71%. So think about if we can prevent contact injuries, you know, we're going to eliminate at least 70% of what's going on. Now, we're not having as many fall fatalities anymore since we now have 100% fall restraint requirement. So we're not having as many people fall. You know, we still have caught in between, you know, we still have people getting stuck between equipment but 71%, at least 70%, maybe more, eliminated if we can stop the contacts. So what we did is we looked at each one of these observations and review of the data as it pertains to contacts. And what we found was failure to follow proper procedure was pretty much a part of every failure listed. It wasn't that there wasn't procedures. It wasn't that they didn't have a process to do this work. It just was not followed. Policy was not followed. Experience in almost every incident did not seem to be the problem. It wasn't experience, right? Training did not appear to be an issue. Now, again, this is what was reported in the data. There was no indication that any of these pertained to contact with the overhead lines. So in other words, we got trained, we got qualified people, and they're not following procedure. Okay, that was what we found. Now, when we looked at violation of minimum approach distance, we also found that it was usually related to the lack of cover and PPE. Just like the incident I was telling you about in my early career with Chris and his contact. He had gloves, they had cover, they had sleeves, they had everything that they needed, but nobody used it. Nobody used it. It was there on the job, they didn't use it. Experience and training also did not appear to be an issue. With any of the data that we were looking at, there was nothing in there that indicated that the guys that were involved with the work were inexperienced or not trained. When we looked at the lack of cover, you know, we wanted to determine did they have it? You know, did they have enough? And nothing indicated that they didn't have it, right? There wasn't anything that on any of the accident reports that indicated in any way that it wasn't available to them. It was, they just didn't use it. Forgetting one blanket or one line hose doesn't appear the issue. They just didn't cover the affected area. They just didn't cover it. For whatever reason, they didn't use it. And again, training and experience did not seem to be an issue at all with any of that. So, lack of personal protective equipment. You know, is a guy out there working without being issued gloves? Are they again not being issued the proper equipment, the proper cover? Was there a hole in a glove? You know, something like that. We looked at every single one of those data points, and in most, if not all, adequate PPE was provided. It was available to them. Incorrect selection of PPE. In other words, wrong rating. We looked at all that, and there wasn't anything that indicated that was a problem either. Failure of the PPE. Was there a hole in a glove, right? Or the sleeves they were using? And no, there was never any kind of an indication for that as well. So testing or training and experience, again, did not seem to be the issue. And not having the PPE, of course, or not using it, was the cause of the fatalities. So, and guys, it's the same as it is today. You know, when we see these incidents happen and we see the contact, it's the same thing. Didn't have his gloves on, didn't have his sleeves on, wasn't using the proper cover. And you know, we are saving more lives. We're not having near the fatalities that we did, especially before 1994, when 1910-269 was issued. We have improved. And then again in 2015, when it was revised and subpart V was revised, we just seem to be stuck in that 30 to 40 fatalities a year. It just seems like we can't get out of that. And again, it's a lot better than it was 30 years ago, but damn it, that's still too many. It's still too many fatalities. So, you know, I get some pushback with this, but I do. I feel like we can eliminate this. There is no reason for someone to contact a known overhead, you know, a line. It shouldn't be happening, and we should be able to eliminate this. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the things. I pulled these off the OSHA database, and these are the ones that are really frustrating. This talks about an apprentice lineman was making repairs to a down power line, and then prior to making the line repair, the disconnect switches supplying 7200 volts were not rendered open and tagged, right? So how do we have an apprentice lineman grabbing a down power line without it being tested, without it being tagged? Now, I know it's a little more complicated than what we read here. There's, you know, especially during storm work, but yeah, testing can occur. Grounding can occur on anything. And there was no disconnection of the power, and there was no grounding, there was no testing for absence of voltage. And it really is puzzling to me how an apprentice lineman can be in a situation where he can grab a down power line without any testing, without any, so these are the kinds of things that we see. Here's another one. It says that an employee was repairing overhead lines and was electrocuted. Now, the problem with some of these OSHA reports that you pull off their database, it doesn't give you a lot of detail. You know, all we know here is he was repairing an overhead line, and he touched it, and he was electrocuted, right? But these are the kinds, see, you can go through that OSHA database and use this one after another. Same thing, 2 employees, both apprentice linemen. These 2 were in their 20s. These were young boys working 7200 volt distribution to restore power after a storm. This was down in Florida. And they were attempting to repair a down power line before isolating the source, both electrocuted. Same job, same down power line. 20, I think one of these kids was like 19. This is the kind of stuff that just blows my mind. We got to do better, right? So why does this stuff happen? Accidents happen, in my view, for one or both reasons. We get told this all the time, either an unsafe act or unsafe conditions, right? So, and I was taught when I first got into safety that 80 to 90% of all incidents occur because of the unsafe act of an individual, 80 to 90%. So that would lead me to believe that as much as 20% can't be avoided, right? It's like people say, well, there's just stuff that happens that you can't avoid, right? I don't believe that. I think that's inaccurate. I think 100% of all accidents are either the result of either the action or inaction of some individual somewhere, sometime. 100%. Especially in our industry. The individual that experiences the accident may not be the one who caused it, but somewhere, sometime, there was an act or a failure to act by an individual which created those circumstances for what took place. 100% of the time. You know, somebody either did something or didn't do something. There was a failure of some kind, right? And again, it might not have been by you, but you know, I get a lot of pushback on that. People say, "Oh, that's not." You know, sometimes things just happen. What about when some rigging breaks, drops a load, right? Well, why'd the rigging break, right? Has it been inspected? Was it ever overstressed? Did I ever exceed the capacity? You know, something happened somewhere, sometime. You may not have been the one that did it, but somewhere at some time, somebody didn't use that rigging properly. And that's what caused it to fail, right? So 100% of the time. So, you know, people say, well, all accidents are avoidable. Well, maybe in a perfect world, I guess. But, yeah. Well, we can prevent the SIFs. That's what I'm mainly focused on. Anyway, most injuries, these are some of the more common beliefs about workplace safety. And I hear this all the time. You know, Mike, the injuries and what happened is the fault of the individual. You know, they made the decision, right? It's their fault. And no, I think that's wrong. Now, yes, the individual did make a decision to maybe bypass, you know, or take a shortcut, but what allowed him to do that? It's the culture in the workplace that allows that. If you have a culture that allows people to break mad and not put up all their cover, yeah, the guys are going to do that. That's the culture that allows that. Accidents are just going to happen. No, they're not. Accidents are caused by a combination of factors that we can identify and we can correct, right? If we comply with OSHA, we're good, right? All we got to do is follow OSHA. Well, not exactly, right? OSHA gives us a lot of instruction. They tell us what to do, but they don't really tell us sometimes how to do it. They just give us the requirement that you got to do this, you got to do A, B, and C. So OSHA's not the answer, right? It just gets us started. So small improvements get us better over time. I hear this all the time as well. No, we don't want to have a goal. Next year, we're only going to have 5 fatalities next year, right? That's not a good goal. Now, 5 is better than 40, of course, but we want, when it comes to SIFs, 0 is our goal. Serious injury and fatality, 0. That's what we're looking for. We haven't had an injury in a year. I've got a client that had a big celebration because they had met this. They'd gone a whole year without having anything happen. They had a big celebration at the end of the year. Well, 2 months into the next year, they had a fatality, right? So just because we haven't had anything happen doesn't mean we're dialed in. Doesn't mean we've got things fixed. You know, there's other reasons for that. You know, Brent and I were talking here a while back, and about September, October timeframe, the notifications for SIFs and injury kind of slowed down. I mean, up until then, man, it was happening weekly. We were having a fatality almost every 11 days, and then September, October timeframe, things kind of quieted down. I mean, we went 60 some days without notification of a fatality. Now, does that mean we're all dialed in? I don't know what it means, right? Now, just recently we had a fatality. I think 2-3 days ago there was a notice of a fatality. But it seems like the pace of that has slowed down. I don't know why, but it just seems like it has. So yeah, we might just be getting lucky. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I hope, my hope is that we are becoming more aware, that we are doing the things. The guys in the field are becoming more vigilant. They're becoming less complacent. They're realizing that, yeah, we can get away with that shortcut. We do it all the time, but maybe we should stop. Maybe that's happening. I don't know. I also hear, and I deal with a lot of companies that feel like if they discipline people more, they would get better compliance. Well, obviously, guys, discipline has to be part of our program. We have to have rules and we have to enforce them, but you can't discipline yourself into compliance. It's got to be done right. And then this last one here, I hear this all the time, and I've seen it my entire career. We have an incident, and the first thing we do is we have a stand down, we go train everybody, right? And then, we have another incident, and we have a stand down, and we train everybody. Training is not necessarily the fix. It's not, most of the time, it's not that the guys haven't been trained and they don't know what to do, they're just not following through. I think we're really good in our industry of training people. I think we have great training programs, but sometimes we tell them what they have to do, but we don't do a very good job of explaining why it's so important. We just give them the rules, we give them the policies, but we don't explain why. And I think we need to do a little bit better job of that. But training's not the answer unless they weren't trained, right? It's not always the answer to everything, but it seems like that's where we go. So, and I have a lot of discussion too about, with some of my clients and others that I work with, is that, are current regulations adequate? Do we have what we need? Are they not? Are we missing something? And my view is that we have the current regulations that we have, if followed, and if procedures are developed and policies developed off of the regulations that we have, it will protect the utility worker in almost all situations. And I presented to a group of guys here last week out in North Dakota, and I asked them this question, and there was a couple of hands that went up and said, no, that's not true. Our regulations aren't adequate. And so I said, well, give me some examples. What is it that, because if you are aware of a hole, why haven't we plugged it? Why haven't we plugged that hole? And so I got them to think about it a little bit more. And, it's not like we have something happen and we go, damn, I didn't see that coming, right? That's something we missed. So I do believe we have adequate regulations. And when things happen, we just keep building on them. And it's like you said, Brent, we just make the book thicker. We just make it thicker, right? Instead of getting to the problem of why it is that people aren't doing it. I don't want to get too far down a rabbit trail here with ground to ground and cradle to cradle and all, our rubber gloves things. We have all these contacts, so we just keep moving that mad. Keep moving it further and further, right? Instead of trying to figure out why people are breaking mad to begin with. And I'm not saying that cradle to cradle and lock to lock and that it's a bad thing. It's just that people are still breaking that rule too. So I believe that if employees, if they fully understand and they follow all the rules and regulations, they're going to be safe. They're going to go home, right? So I get a lot of pushback in that area, and people tell me that, Mike, we just have dangerous jobs. We gotta accept that we're going to have some fatalities and injuries. And I say that's BS, right? I don't think we have dangerous jobs. I don't think line work per se is dangerous, right? We don't work in a dangerous environment. We have hazards, and they're bad hazards. They're hazards that we cannot make mistakes with. We can't take shortcuts, but we don't have dangerous jobs. We just have hazards that can be controlled, and if we don't control them, and if we don't address them, that makes it dangerous. But we don't send people out to work knowing that they're going into danger, right? So I have a different perspective on that. So one thing about our industry, guys, is it's predictable. You know, we know what's going to happen if somebody touches a high voltage line, right? We know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen if somebody falls out of a bucket. If they're up there without their harness and they flex that boom, they're going to get bounced out, right? We know that. But we also know that it's extremely unforgiving. You know, when something happens in our industry, when somebody makes contact, it's going to be either fatal or the injuries are going to be serious. We know that. It's predictable, but it's very unforgiving. And it's just too often in our industry that we have people that are taking these shortcuts, that are violating MAD, and not using proper cover and not using proper PPE, you know, and they get away with it over and over and over and over again. So what does that do? It creates that complacency when it comes to that particular rule, and I truly believe that that's what we have going on out there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the areas that I think we can make some changes and tighten up a bit. I spend a lot of time out in the field, and when I get out and I talk to people, one of the things I try really hard to make a commitment for is to get out and watch how we handle our job briefings, how we handle our hazard assessment. And some people are really, really good at this. Some people really do a great job with our hazard assessments. And part of that hazard assessment to me is making sure everybody understands this stop work authority. And you know, when I go and I read all of these fatalities and I look at what's happening and I go through this OSHA database, it becomes pretty clear that on most of these jobs, the guy that got killed or injured, he's not there by himself. There's others there. We got 3, 4, 5, up to 6 people sometimes on these projects, on these jobs. They're rarely out there by themselves, especially when we start reading about apprentices getting killed, right? So what's happening to our stop work? Somebody has to be watching and knowing that we're violating some of these rules, but yet nobody says anything. Nobody says a word. And that's disturbing. So how effective is your stop work program? And here a while ago, I ran across I'm on the internet a lot. I'm reading, I read stuff constantly, and I ran across a study that was done by a company out in Texas, and a consulting firm, and they went out and they polled 2,600 people from all kinds of industry. And their survey, basically what it came up with was that almost in every case, these companies had a SWA, you know, Stop Work Authority program. And over 60% of those people interviewed said they would not speak up. 60% said that if they saw someone violating a rule, they wouldn't speak up. And then the report went on a little bit further, and it said that that 40% that said that they would, in reality, when it came down to it, there was only a small percentage of them that because they didn't want to admit that they wouldn't say anything, but in reality, so they had a formula. The point I'm making here, guys, is people aren't going to say anything. They're not, especially when it's common to see the shortcut that's taken. And we get away with it over and over and over again. Nobody says jack about it. You just go about your work. And that's tough, guys. That's not good. So we need to be better at that. And we've got to be better at our hazard assessment. We just do. We got to be better at the hazard assessment. And we gotta be thorough. We gotta make sure that we're really, truly assessing these hazards, making sure that we're briefing everybody and talking about it, how we're gonna prevent it, making contact or getting near MAD. What are we gonna do about it? Are we briefing everybody completely? Or like some, are we just checking the boxes, right, and getting signatures? There's a lot of times where I'll pull up to a job, and man, somebody sees me pull up and they run over to the truck and they grab the job briefing clipboard and they hand it to me and they want me to sign it, right? Now I'm not involved with the job and I know how to keep out of the way, so I'm not really that concerned that much about them briefing me on everything. What concerns me is that that's what they're doing with the crew as well. We're just getting signatures. All we're doing is passing that clipboard around and getting signatures. And the company has drilled that into these guys, that form is the most important thing you can do all day. I can check all the damn boxes I want. I can write all kinds of stuff down. But if we're not talking about it, and we're not getting that buy-in from everybody, then we're doing it wrong. It's just, why do the damn thing to begin with? Because they're just worried about the signatures. So that's got to change. We need to make sure that everybody, who's doing what? Who is going to do this? Who's going to do that? Everybody's got to be on the same page that way. We got to talk about hazards and controls. We got to talk about the PPE, the cover, everything that we're going to use, the inspection of all our rigging, the inspection of your PPE. All that stuff has to be talked about. And for heaven's sakes, make sure everybody understands they can stop work. And there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to stop work. And one of them is that, they're going to get yelled at. They're going to be told to shut the hell up, right? And you do that one time, and you just killed your stop work program. One time, you tell an apprentice to keep his mouth shut, and you just change that apprentice's approach to stop work for the rest of his career. He'll never say another word about it. So, that's an issue. Rescue procedures, guys. If something goes south, we got to know how to take care of people. How are we going to, and my view is if we do the right planning, the right hazard assessment, and we approach things right, we're not going to have to worry, hopefully, about rescue procedures. But sometimes things go south, and we got to know what we're going to do. We got to know how we're going to get people out of the air and get them the care they need as quickly as possible. So that's something that needs to be talked about. Ask questions. Get involved. Everyone should be participating in this. And if we'll do this, I'm telling you, we'll cut down on these things. We'll cut down on these incidents if we do this right. When you finish up that job briefing, make sure that you're talking about, what are the critical steps for the work to be performed? What's the most critical things we're going to be doing on this process? How could we make a mistake during this critical step? The most, the risky of the work. What's the mistakes that can be made? And how are we going to address that? What's the worst thing that can go wrong? right? Talk about that, you know, and how we're going to make sure that it doesn't go wrong, and what barriers, what defenses that we're going to use for that scenario. And I think you know, the companies that I work with that you know, how many of us have actually trained people how to do a job briefing? How many companies have actually had a classroom exercise and trained people how to do? I'm telling you, there's people out there that just simply have a hard time talking to people, you know, doing these. I've watched people stumble through these. How many people have actually trained people how to do it, other than just give them a form and say, do your job briefings? So, you know, every morning when we get together and do this job briefing, we all should be looking at each other and, you know, and pledging we're gonna do this safe. We're gonna do it right. We're gonna do it safe. And not today should be our new motto, right? We're gonna break and we're gonna go to work, and we're all walking away saying, not today. This is not going to be the day that somebody doesn't go home. So, all right. So, one of the main things that I think we can get dialed in on, and that are our foremen in the field. I think really it's the most critical piece of the puzzle. We got to have the right people. We got to have leaders out there. And a couple weeks ago, there was a post by an individual. Some of you may know John Quorum, JC, goes by JC. I've never met JC, but every Sunday he posts a safety, calls it Safety Sunday, and he'll give a thought about safety in our industry, and he'll share something, and it's on a Facebook group called Linemen Take a Stand for Safety. And it doesn't matter, it's there every Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning when I get up, one of the first things I do is I go and look at this. When I get up, make my pot of coffee, and I grab my phone and I'll open this up to see what JC had to say. And as I was working on this presentation, I opened that up a couple weeks ago, and there was he's just always spot on. Some of them are really short, but they're just something that make you think. And a couple weeks ago, you know, I'm working on my presentation, and he posted something about leadership. And I wanted to read this part of this and share it with you. So, because I think it's just spot on. This is to me the key right here. Leadership is not for the faint of heart. It requires courage and commitment. It requires skill and knowledge, empathy and understanding. The list goes on and on. But I believe foremen are the key to reducing fatalities on the job. They're on the front lines ensuring safe work practices are being executed. If you're a foreman who lives and breathes safety, your crew would follow. And they will live, and the work will get done, right? He says, make 24 the safest it can be. Decide, do. And this could not be more spot on. And it's something that I've always tried to promote. And I like some of the things he said here. You know, it's that it requires skill and knowledge, empathy and understanding. Not only are you running a crew, but you're dealing with people, right? And everybody on that crew, every person on that crew has issues. They got family issues, they got financial issues, they have, you know, there's illness, there's all kinds of things that these guys are dealing with. And, you know, you got to be dialed into some of that. You really do, because you're leading these people. You're the leader. And I want to talk about a little bit what that means. Because I believe with proper training and insight, everybody can become a safety leader especially the guys out there in the field, especially the foreman. And, you know, leadership isn't just power. And unfortunately, that's the way some people approach it. You know, it's a power thing, and leadership is not power. When we talk about leadership, we're talking about people that can bring about a desired outcome, right? And prevent the ones that we don't want. That's what, you know, leadership is to a degree. And it's not derived from status, you know, and position. You don't confer leadership just because, or get leadership, or you're not a good leader just simply because you got the job, right? And it comes from below, right? You got to be a good leader. Leaders are always going to have power, but they're not always leaders, you know. And I'm sure most of you know that, you know, leadership is neutral. It can be used for good and it can be used for bad, right? So it's not just status. Status may enhance your opportunity to get that leadership position, but it also brings with it accountability, right? If you're going to take that position, you got to be willing to be accountable, and that's a huge part of it as well. And again, some people may have that status and position, but they have no clue how to lead people. And I've seen crews just fall apart by putting in the wrong person in that position. They're not a team. They're not cohesive, and so we got to be very careful, I think, about who we put in these positions. So the leadership isn't conferred from above. It's earned, right, from who's below you. It's conferred by the people that your subordinates below you. Okay, it's not authority. You may have subordinates, but you don't have anybody following you. So you're only going to have that if you act like a leader. Okay, so and then I hear at times, you know, well, it's just common sense, right? Leadership, working in the field, it's just common sense. People just need to use common sense. Well, what is common sense, right? And how do we develop common sense? And I think it's not I don't like this term. I don't think we have, because it's more good sense to me, right? We don't all think the same. We don't all have the same views, right? And common sense would mean that everybody leads the same way, right? And that's not the way it works. So I don't like the term common sense, because again, that implies we all think the same, and we don't. We're all different, right? Good sense. So you know, I think we really need to look hard at who we have out there. Are they just a manager and a supervisor, or are they a leader? Are they going to inspire people, right? And are we going to hold that person accountable for how he treats and how he guides and how he leads? Because the difference between the two can have a big impact on your work. So managers, of course, and bosses just manage to control. They're just out there to control you. Where a leader out there is there to support the team and guide them, you know, accordingly. So, and then, you know, sometimes you get that really high level manager or leader, and they inspire people, you know. Man, I'll tell you, I've been on some crews. There was a guy that worked for Tri-State out in Colorado, and my gosh, one of the smartest linemen I've ever been around. And my gosh, everybody was just so dialed in, you know, because he treated people the way they wanted to or needed to be treated, and he taught, and people learned, and they'd follow they'd walk off a cliff with this guy, you know. And then you got the other leaders that are just screaming and yelling at everybody. you know, and so hopefully we can get people out there to inspire us to do what's right. So, because I think these guys will get us to that point where we have zero SIFs, right? So, a couple of things I want to talk about that I think are critical for some of our leaders, and above all things, I think they got to be loyal. You know, that leader's got to be loyal to his crew. And if he is, they'll be loyal to him. And one thing I want to make clear is that disagreement is not necessarily disloyalty, right? Not everybody's right all the time. Not everybody, just because you're the leader doesn't mean you can't be challenged, right? Disagreement is not disloyalty, right? It's an opportunity. Disagreement to me is an opportunity to learn and come together as a team, right? So just because somebody disagrees doesn't mean that they're wrong. You know, they might be, but that needs to be determined. So loyalty is just critical for our crews out there. As a leader, you got to be loyal. And loyalty is, I believe, what holds that crew together and relationships. So how do they get loyalty? Well, you got to be competent. You know, who's in charge? Employees look to their bosses for solutions. And again, guys on the crew are going to bring problems to you that almost daily have really nothing to do with line work, right? You're their leader, and they're going to bring problems to you, and they want solutions. And if you blow everybody off when they're asking for this solution to a problem and help, and it's not provided, you're not going to be as effective, right? And it's just going to add to some of the frustration with the crews. So you've got to listen. You've got to be dialed in, and your crew has to feel that their boss is aware of their concerns and their almost daily needs. You know, even when I'm working out there in the field as a safety, it's amazing what people will bring to me as the safety guy. Not just safety issues. People come to you with all kinds of things, and right or wrong, it's just the way things are, in the field. So you got to be aware of that. You got to be dialed into that, and you got to support your guys 100%. You got to back your people, you know, and there will come a time where the leaders got to take the target off the back of the employee and put it on his back, right? Things go wrong sometimes, and if the foreman, you know, sometimes he makes the wrong decision, and things go bad, and if he puts that on the crew rather than himself, that's gonna damage that loyalty out there. So. You know, it's disagreements can be worked out, but you can lose that loyalty in seconds, right? Just by making the wrong decision and piling blame on somebody else, you've lost it. That loyalty's gone, and that trust and commitment is going to be tough to get back. So you got to be loyal. Now, one of the biggest, I think, key components to being a good leader in the field is courage, right? You got to have the courage to carry out your assignments. And one of your assignments, of course, is ensuring that rules are being followed, right? And shortcuts are not taken. And this is tough for some people. It really is. And there's a lot of reasons why a supervisor may not insist on compliance, and they're varied. One of them is, I think, that the supervisor, the foreman, may not perceive the situation as necessarily being hazardous or unsafe. He just doesn't see it that way. And a lot of that is because they've done it before. The risk is minimized, right? Because they've engaged in that activity in other jobs, right? And so the level of the hazard is deemed to be below that actionable level. We've done this before. We've taken that shortcut. So there's no point of me, you know, I don't need to stop work, right? We've done this before. We're good. So the supervisor may think, the foreman may think that the situation and the exposure just doesn't warrant intervention. And again, a lot of this is done because we've done it before, or because we know we're going to stop production, right? And in a construction-oriented company, or a production-oriented task, you know, that's what we do. You know, when we're in the construction side, we're not making money if we're not putting poles in the ground, putting wire in the air, you know. So if this is a minor thing, so I'm not going to stop the work, and so it just continues, right? And then we build into that crew that shortcut. We're just going to keep doing that. So another thing that we look at is that the supervisor, the foreman, may look at that and say, this is only going to take 5 minutes, right? It's minimal time, and so the exposure is limited. And of course the worker that's engaged in this, he's done it before, he's experienced, and so that stoppage is ignored. And that's where we get back to stop work authority. You know, you've got, if the foreman's not concerned about it, then I'm not concerned about it, right? So stop work authority is gone, okay? Supervisor may not want to alienate someone, right? If he sees something, and let's face it, sometimes there's peer pressure, right? Not to speak up. And like we talked about earlier, if somebody does speak up and somebody shuts them down, you've ended it. Nobody's going to say anything. So again, they just don't see any good reason to do it any differently than they're doing it, because it's the way they've always done it. Okay, so another potential unsafe act, it could be performed by someone with more experience than the foreman, right? That happens. We can have somebody up in the air doing a task. The foreman is less experienced than the guy. You know, the foreman may be 30 years old, has been in the industry for 10, 15 years. The guy in the air's 40, 50 years up there. He doesn't want to say anything. You know, he's timid, right? The guy's got more experience, so he doesn't speak up. So other things that can happen, he may be fearful that he's going to misrepresent, you know, the situation, and again get called out for it, and so he doesn't speak up. So those are just some of the things that I think prevent people from, you know, the foreman from saying things. Another leadership quality to think we've got to really, you know, a foreman's really got to have the desire. He really does, to make sure that his guys are going home safe, and to be dialed in. He's got to have the desire to do that. He's got to have that strong personal desire to do it. Okay. Another quality is accountability. You've got to hold people accountable, right? And a good leader is going to be willing to accept that accountability. And you know, a supervisor, a foreman should never, you know, heap praise or lay blame on others for what they themselves achieve or fail to achieve, right? If he takes all the glory for the good stuff, but he transfers all the bad stuff to the crew, that's just not gonna fly, right? So he's got to learn to be accountable. Most supervisors today, I believe, know what they're responsible. They know they're responsible for safety, but yet they don't do it. You know, and I ask why. Well, it's because they're usually not held accountable, right? They're not measured in safety. That's one of the problems, is that they're just not held accountable. Okay, and so when we look at accountability, when a foreman takes personal accountability, they're just willing to answer for the outcome of their choices and their behaviors. I think we definitely need better accountability. We don't blame others when things go sideways. We try to make things right, and you're gonna have a much better performing crew if that accountability is there with that foreman. So, 4 strategies to become more accountable. Just a couple things here, and then I'm going to move on to a different topic. But availability, or accountability to me, starts with honesty. A leader, that foreman out there, has to be 100% honest, right? No gaslighting, no half truths. You got to be honest with your guys, right? You got to be willing to say you're sorry when something's gone awry, and it's your decision, it's your wrongdoing that did it. Accountable leaders seek input, right? Bosses, peers, direct reports, friends, partners. You want input from your guys. What went wrong and how can we do it better, right? So, and accountable leaders do not avoid responsibility. They don't procrastinate, and they don't over or under commit, right? They know when to say no, and they know how people think, and again, if you're honest and you're willing to accept when you make mistakes, it's going to go a long ways with the guys. Okay, you got to be responsible, of course. And I believe this with everything I know, that we should not have a leader out there. He should not be allowed to be a foreman. He should not be allowed to be a leader if he won't accept full responsibility for his actions, right? He's got a job to do, and he's got to come through with it. He's got to be credible, and again, that means being honest and to be trusted. He's got to be dependable, and again, if we've got a foreman out there that cannot be depended on to carry out his roles and responsibilities, they need to be relieved. Something needs to happen, because if he's not doing his job, if he's not becoming that leader that we want, we don't need him there. You know, somebody else needs to do it. So, a couple other things here that I think are important when we talk about leaders and that stewardship. And I think it's really important here. Subordinates are not to be abused, right? I just remember back through my career and some of my years as an apprentice, and some of the things that are said and done to some of the new hands. And I know things have changed, right? But and I know there's a certain amount of horseplay and good, clean fun out there on the crew. I'm not against that at all. But there are some times where I think we take things too far with some of our subordinates, and they're to be guided and developed and rewarded for their performance, because they're going to become better linemen, right? So punishments reserved as a consequence of last resort, and I think that we probably need to do a little bit better with how we discipline and how we write our rules and how we hold people accountable for them. I think there's some companies that do a really good job at it, and then there's other companies that discipline isn't fair. It depends on who it is sometimes, what their status is of, you know, how we're going to discipline. So those are some things that I think we need to think about. So again, guys, the leader is the one that sets that tone. They're the ones that do that change the culture and get people all thinking the same. Whatever the leader expects will be expected of him. And I think that's really important. If you want your crew to care about you, you got to care about your crew, right? You got to demonstrate care. If you want honest and fair employee behavior, you got to be the same. You know, it's not going to change. And if you expect loyalty, you got to be loyal. So yeah, it's I'm gonna switch over here, and I want to talk about priorities and values a bit, because I hear this all the time. Safety is our number one priority. I hear it constantly. I've been to facilities where it's on a banner hanging above out in the shop. You know, safety number one priority. And it might be, right? But the thing that I think people need to understand is priorities change, right? And to prioritize something means you are putting things in a certain order of importance, right? And if I say safety is number one priority, right? What happens when production suffers, right? Well, production then maybe be moved up to the number one priority. So when we prioritize things, it's something that can be moved depending on the need, right? And so I think we need to look at things a little bit different, and especially in a production-oriented culture, which is what we do in construction. It's a production-oriented culture. And I'm just going to say it. Safety is not our number one priority. It's not. Building power lines, building substations, that's our number one priority. Work, production, that's the priority. We got to make money. That's why we're all here. Okay, so I want to talk about values a little bit, because safety has to be a value, and it's something that means that if I have that value, it's not going to change, right? I'm not going to be changing the priorities around so that I can get more production done and safety suffers. When the going gets tough, we've got to have a value that's just non-negotiable. And that's where we've got to get. Values don't change. So that's something that I think people it sounds good to say safety is our number one priority, but it's just not. It's not something we do separate. It's not something that we got X amount of dollars over here and we got X amount of dollars over here, and it's just not done. It's not a separate process. Having safe people in a safe workplace is the outcome of how we do business, right? We can't have production if we're hurting people. So it gets mixed up a little bit. I think it's something that I think people need to think about a little bit more when we think about safety and how it's got to become a value. Safety is not our number one priority. So another thing to think about when it comes to values and priorities is that, and I've noticed this throughout my career, people are natural risk takers. Okay, people will take risks. When you look at the number of things that people do off the job, the extreme sports, whether it's skydiving, scuba diving, motorcycles, motocross, especially the younger guys. They do stuff off work that has a lot of risk, right? And so we know they're risk takers. They're just going to be taking risks. And that's no different when they come to work. Everybody has their level of risk that they're willing to take, right? And we got to know how to manage that, because left to their own devices, they're going to take risks, even at work, right? So we have to figure that out. And to me, part of that is changing that safety into a value, and training and teaching to that, and everybody understanding that it's not a priority. We're not going to change things just because production suffers. Because again, guys, people are risk takers. They're going to take risks. So now another thing that I've seen throughout my career is the amount of time and money and effort we spend on speeches, bringing people in, speeches, programs, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all, but I've seen it over and over again. We have a situation where a company's having a hard time with their incident rates, and you bring in a program of some kind. And I don't want to mention, but there's a lot of great programs out there. There really are. There's a lot of motivational speakers out there that come in and rev everybody up, but it doesn't last, right? It doesn't last. It's not really changing the culture. It gets people, worked up, and everybody thinks, wow, that's great. Let's go. But it doesn't change anything in my view. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It just, we've got to work on this value of safety and what it really means. And it means that safety is non-negotiable, right? It's not going to change. When production suffers, it's not going to change. So, yeah. And I want to show or talk about one incident here that, to me, just really dials this in. This happened back in 2017. Company out in Florida. And there were 5 people killed. They have this process where you have liquid coal slag from the boilers go into these tanks, and occasionally they get plugged up, right? And years ago, they had an incident where they were trying to unclog this liquefied coal slag, and the clog broke loose, and it came out and it killed somebody. So they wrote a procedure. They wrote a process that required that it always be shut down, that this process be shut down and this cooled before you unclogged it. Well, they ran into it again, 2017. They got with the safety professionals, and they reviewed the procedure, which said, we're never going to do this again unless we shut the system down. Well, obviously, the managers got together and they started doing crunching some numbers on what it was going to cost them to shut the process down. So what did they decide? It's too expensive. We're gonna hire some contractors, and they're gonna come in here, and they're gonna look at this, and they're gonna do it live. They're gonna do it while the system's running. 5 young kids. Well, this clog broke loose, and it says 20 minutes into the job, thousands of gallons of slag rushed from the boiler, shooting out of the tank through the doghouse door, and it covered these guys up. 6 inches deep, 40 feet wide. And when I first pulled this report up and I was reading it, one of the lines in here was it said that one of these young boys called his mother on the phone. He had a cell phone with him, and told her what was going on, and told her that he was being burned to death. Well, while it was happening. And why did they do it? because they took that priority, right? The priority now wasn't safety, it's money. 5 people died. So that's a good example. Maybe it's a harsh example, but that's what we get into, right? So, we got to have leaders out there that insist on these high standards, and care about everybody's safety, and that they're not going to change their priorities, right? And you got to know how to communicate with people, and you don't do it by screaming and yelling, right? It's just not the great way to communicate with people, it just doesn't send the right message when we're screaming and yelling. So, as Dwight D. Eisenhower said, he said, "You don't lead people by hitting them over the head. That's assault, not leadership," right? So people have to trust you, and another thing that I think is critical here is positive reinforcement. If guys are doing a good job, tell them, right? That goes a long ways. People like to have that pat on the back. They like to know they're doing a good job. It's going to create, they're going to want to do better work, right? If people are being told that they're doing a good job, they're going to feel better about their work. It's just simple as that. So, positive reinforcement it's to me, a lot of people talk about, I'd be happier if I had more money, right? If they'd pay me a little bit more money, I'd be happier. And money's good, right? But going home at night knowing that your boss thinks you're doing a good job, I think that's huge. It really is. It means a lot. It's gonna motivate people to do a better job. It just simply is. So, leaders got to have commitment. We've talked about that. And I think this is important to remember. Intent does not guarantee effect, right? That's what, when I say, people say safety is our number one priority. Well, that's our intent, but it's not going to guarantee that that's going to happen unless you're following through. And top management down has to follow through on that. So discipline, I don't want to talk about that too much because I'm telling you, there's not a lot of companies out there that do this right. We either don't discipline at all, or we discipline for the wrong reasons, right? And just because something goes sideways does not necessarily mean that someone needs to be disciplined. There's a lot of factors that go into it. We got to have rules. We have to have procedures. And those rules, once they're established, it's critical that we support them and we enforce them, right? Because I'm telling you guys, I see all the time where we write rules and we write them because something went wrong, but we don't enforce them. We just simply don't. We just write more rules. Like you said, Brent, the book just gets thicker and thicker, right? So we got to have that accountability, and we got to link it to consequences, right? Enforcement through a disciplinary procedure it's an important piece, and it needs to be part of it. So I ran across this quote from Scott Geller. I think it's really important. Most of our safe and at-risk behaviors are learned behaviors. We learn by watching, and the way things are performed in a particular setting to gain either positive consequences or avoid the negative, right? If we see somebody doing something wrong and they're getting hammered for it, we're going to be less likely to do that, right? That's how we learn. We learn these at-risk behaviors by watching people do at-risk behaviors. It's just simple as that. Discipline works best, of course, when it's used consistently. And if we got people out there breaking rules and nobody's holding them accountable, that's what we've learned. And we're just going to keep doing that wherever we go, okay? Training. is important, obviously, and I think we do a really good job with training. But is it well understood, right? Are we just giving them, and I'm telling you, I think we do a good job with it, but a lot of stuff we train and they don't know why we want them to do something. We tell them they have to, but we don't tell them why. So, and the number one reason I think that employees don't follow the rules in general is they don't know why it's so important. They really don't know why it's so important. Which is kind of puzzling to me when I start thinking about all these contacts. Everybody knows if they touch it, it's going to hurt them, right? So why are we not, I don't know, we're missing something there, I think. But I do believe that there's a lot of stuff that we train people on that, one group of people can come out of there thinking one thing and another group can come out thinking the other. Grounding is one of those things. My gosh, to me, personal protective grounding is fairly simple and fairly straightforward. But my gosh, everywhere you go, there's different beliefs, and there's, no, you got a bracket ground, and that stops everything here, and it won't reach, it's just all over the place. But everybody goes through the same training. So I think sometimes we miss the boat on some of that. And I think too that if people really truly understand the consequences, both natural and the consequences of getting hurt, but also the consequences of discipline for not following a rule, I think they'll be more likely to comply. So, and I got one example here of how I think this applies when people who work for the same company can have two different views on how to do something. And this applied to a grounding incident. This happened up in Washington State a few years ago. And you've got a situation where a contractor has been hired to relocate a couple of sexualizing switches. So you got two crews that are basically doing the exact same job, right? One crew over here is going to relocate a switch. The crew over here is going to relocate a switch. It's de-energized, but they're in a corridor, so there's induction, and they know there's induction. They know it's going to be hot. And so they get together as a crew, and they talk about how they're going to ground, how they're going to protect from induction. And there was a disagreement, right? Now, think about this. This is the same company, so the guys presumably have been through the same grounding training. They learned the same thing. But this foreman and this crew over here are saying, nope, we're going to do it this way. And this crew over here is saying, nope, we're going to do it this way. So basically what they did is they agreed to disagree, split up, and one crew starts over here, one crew starts over here. Well, during the process, crew one, it says, they established an EPZ correctly. Crew two did not. And so there was a fatality. And it was concluded by the board that they did not create an EPZ zone, right? So I don't know if anybody can see this, but basically what you have here is that the line's de-energized, and you can see the crew went up and it grounded the conductors, and they brought that set of grounds down to a ground rod. And then they took the switch stand and they bonded it to the pole ground, right? So, and here's what I see out there over and over again, right? You see this sign, it says if it's not grounded, it's not dead, right? Well, there's two grounds on here. You got the conductors grounded and you got the switch stand bonded to the pole ground. The foreman gets up, he's standing on the switch stand, and he touches the switch arm, and it kills him, right? The induced voltage on that line, was sufficient to cause a, he's trying to equalize that potential now between that switchblade and the stand, and it killed him because they established two separate ground sources. The switch stand was not grounded to the same ground source as the conductors. So when he touched it, he's put himself in that. And we're not teaching these guys to think electrically. We're teaching them to think mechanically. And I hate this sign. I hate it. I see it everywhere. And it's not true, right? But here you got guys that were trained at the same company, learning the same things, presumably, and they do it different. They see it totally different. So anyway, we've just got to make sure that when we train people, we're getting it dialed in, and that's just one of those areas. I'm very passionate about grounding, and we do see fatalities occasionally with induced voltage, and it just doesn't have to happen. It's very simple, I think, to fix that. So, okay, just to sum up here, I got a few things to conclude with, and just guys, we need to maintain a positive attitude out there. Be alert to potential danger. Know your surroundings. Situational awareness is critical. Know where the live parts are. Know where the traps are. Understand induction. Know how it works. Get dialed in, and just be alert. Right? Trust your instincts. That's huge. If something doesn't look right, something doesn't feel right, stop. Just plain stop, and get it dialed in. And again, be aware of your surroundings. Know where the equipment is. Know when it's moving, and just you got to be looking all the time. You got to be thinking. You just do. It's just we got to get to a point where we got to avoid anything that doesn't feel safe. Anticipating potential problems, right? Think ahead. Like you're playing chess. What's going to happen when I do this? When I grab the control on this bucket and I move it over here, what's the potential hazard over here, right? Always be thinking ahead. Be vigilant, be prepared for anything, because stuff happens, right? Things can go sideways. And just because we had that job briefing and just because we dialed it all in and we talked about everything does not mean that things can't change, because they will. It just will, okay? Here's something I think is really important. Everybody has what I consider a level of acceptable risk. Some people call that a LORA, right? LORA, level of acceptable risk. Everybody has it, right? I ride motorcycles, and I have a level of acceptable risk. I ride at a certain speed, right? I always wear a helmet. There's just things that I do, and I ride with there's a guy I ride with that will text while he's on his motorcycle. He is texting when he's on his motorcycle, and it drives me out of my mind, because I don't want to be picking him up off the road, but sooner or later. Yeah, so everybody has that level of risk, and you need to know where it is. Where's that warning light? Where's that threshold that every one of us have? And when you figure that out where that's at, lower that damn thing. Bring it down a notch, right? Because it's probably too high. So know where that level of risk is. Here's the thing about that level of risk. Every time you take a shortcut, every time you take a risk while you're performing work and you get away with it, what do? You're going to raise that up a bit. I can get away with this. So know where that level of risk is. you're the first line of defense. Everybody out there, and especially that leader, especially that foreman, and with that proper attitude and that awareness, we can keep people out of harm's way. We can stop having these SIFs. I know we can. No one knows your job better than you do. You know the tools, you know the job, and we all know the hazards. Nobody knows it better than you. And like I said earlier, man, linemen are just smart people. That's just all there is to it. It's hard work, but you gotta be able to think to be able to do it. And if you think your job is unsafe, just simply don't do it. So, okay, just to conclude here, SIFs can be eliminated. I'm 100% dialed into that. We can stop people from getting killed and injured. I know we can. Hold yourself to a higher standard. Do not take the easy way out. Take the time and energy to do it right, and just make it a habit to follow procedure. It doesn't matter. What if it does take you 20 more minutes? For what? It just doesn't matter. It really doesn't. The work's still going to get done. It will. It's going to get done. And this is a quote from a guy that I'm not sure if Mark is still active. I think he's quite a bit older than me, but he put out a video. His guy's name is Mark Velholder, and he put out a video years and years ago, back in probably late 70s. And he was a lineman down in New Mexico, and he made a mistake while they were doing some troubleshooting on some URD, and he reached into an energized switch and grabbed it, and it blew his arm off. He lost his arm. And he does a video, and he talks about his injury, and it's just super good. But he always ends with this quote whenever he does a talk, and I've kind of, in a way, adopted it because I think it's just perfect, right? Ask yourself, how comfortable are you? What shortcuts are you taking, and what price are you willing to pay? I think we got to ask ourselves that with not only what we do at work, but in life in general. What are you willing to pay? Physically and monetarily, what are you willing to pay? And who else is going to pay, right? Because it's not just you. And he talks about how selfish he was, right? When I took this shortcut, when I didn't test that circuit, and I didn't ground it like I'd been trained and I knew I was supposed to do, that was selfish, because I took away not only my arm, but my livelihood, and all this, the pain and suffering that my family, that went with it. So he's really, whenever I watch it, it just really helps to bring it home. You got to think about who else is going to pay, not just you. Who else, right? And then he'd always finish with this: remember, you're the last one to have the hands on it. You are the last one to have that chain of thought go through your mind on what got you where you're at, what you're about to do, and what the potential outcome is. Just you, nobody else. Where are you at right now? And when I take this next step, what are the consequences? So, and that's what happened to him. He didn't test. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, and it cost him. So, I'm out of words, Brent. So I appreciate the opportunity, and gosh, I hope it helps dial people in. So with that, I'm done, and appreciate the time.